Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Genese Davis, author of The Holder's Dominion. Genese, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Paul. I am thrilled to be here.
Are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am. I'm excited. I've heard so much about you, and I really, really appreciate all the work that you do in the industry.
Well, and we are thrilled to have you on the show. And let's go with question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I really like this question, actually. I do panels quite often for conventions across the country, and this is a popular one. And I've kind of narrowed it down in my mind to, I think, the core piece of advice that has really helped me as a young writer and other writers is that often we get overwhelmed because we want to write several stories and in several genres. But I think a core piece of advice is to narrow that scope and figure out what is really calling to you. If there's like a fantasy epic, Lord of the Rings type story that's really calling to you, let that marinate and really concentrate on that one and figure out the scope and the story and nail that down rather than feeling like, oh, I also want to write this sci-fi or this thriller or this mystery. I feel like we can get really overwhelmed by the number of projects we want to take on or the number of genres we want to learn or perfect, or even the number of industries we want to write in. Like, oh, I kind of want to be a novelist, but oh, I could also write for video games, or I want to write a screenplay. So really narrowing down what your core goal is first, or one or two goals or one or two genres, really helps clarify and bring clarity to a new writer.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Oh, that's such a multi-layer question. It depends really on your what does published mean to you. So I used to write video game columns for this epic, video game company, MMORPG.com. They're very widely known, and so getting published, writing columns and being a published columnist for them was my definition of being a published writer. Some people's definition of getting published is being a novelist for Random House, and other people want to write their own book and self-publish it, and that's published. So first, what do you mean by getting published? What route do you want to take? So once you narrow that down, it's much easier. If you want to take a self-publishing route, then you start researching what do you really excel in? Do you excel in the cover art and the editing and the marketing? You kind of figure out what you're really good at doing, and you can tackle those and then hire out the other pieces. If you want to go the traditional route, you really have to narrow down again, what are you writing? If you're writing a traditional YA book that fits in the traditional YA definition, then you probably want to go that traditional route. But what if you're mixing genres? What if you're writing a thriller, punk, YA with a little bit of fantasy, and you're actually inventing your own genre? Then you're not going to want to approach a traditional publisher because that's not their niche, right? So it's you can get overwhelmed thinking of a publishing route because you're actually not realizing that if you narrow the scope of what you're writing, it'll open the door for how you approach and get published.
Well, and you bring up a good point, because we were talking prior to the show. You do a ton of writing outside of just your books. You're writing you do different projects for different video game companies. I mean, could you share more about that experience? Because you have a very unique background, and I love all the projects that you do.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for asking. So, a lot of times when I'm asked by new writers for advice, I talk about the power of saying yes and the power of putting yourself into situations where you're meeting new people, going to conventions, going to Comic-Con, going to E3, going to writers conventions and meeting agents and publishers. There's a power in meeting people and saying yes. But I also want to say very quickly that my specific story actually highlights the moments that saying no can be just as powerful or more powerful. And this is why. I wrote a thriller called The Holder's Dominion about a woman who goes head to head with a hacker. And that's unique. There's not very many stories out there with about a main hero who's a woman who's in the world of video games. She's not at first, but she dives in and then she goes after this hacker who's manipulating players in this online game. And so I was actually offered a lucrative contract by an incredibly large publishing house for Holders when it was in its infancy. And this was back in 2011 or so. And this was before we had Wonder Woman on the big screen, and this was before female heroines in this way was more popular. And the one caveat that was in the contract was that they would like Kaylee, my main hero, who was a woman, to be changed to Ken. It just made more sense to them to have a male role in this hacker video game, very cool thriller-esque type story. And for every new writer, that moment of getting your foot in the door and then getting a publisher, an agent, and getting your first book out there, it's this moment where you have a catch in your throat and you're just, you have chills all over. But I realized that I couldn't say yes. I realized that the whole reason I wrote Holders was because I wanted to spotlight a woman in tech and going after this hacker and the journey that she goes through, the ups and downs. So amazingly, I respectfully declined and I said no. Now, in the moment, I thought I was shooting my writing career, dead. I thought, what am I doing? Anyone else would just dive at this chance. But there was some core in me that pushed me to do that. And what's amazing is that opened the door for me to be asked to speak on how do you write a woman hero in a unique or situation that women are not normally put in. And I happened to meet on that panel a beloved artist who's also director who knows quite a few contacts in Los Angeles, and that led to me meeting and working with Stan Lee, the late Stan Lee, and writing novels for him for this new intellectual property that he created before he passed away. So it's amazing that sticking to your core goals as a writer can lead you to opportunities that you never imagined. So I'm currently writing a trilogy, sci-fi trilogy, under the code name Project Nitron for the late Stan Lee and Benaroya Pictures. And that never, I believe, that never would have happened had I not stuck to those cores I talked about, narrowing down what stories are calling to you and stick to your guns about them. Whew. That was it. You could hear it in my voice. I get emotional because it's a really incredible moment of deciding, your writer as a future. I mean, sorry, your future as a writer. And of course, pushing myself to step outside my more bashful comfort zone and getting out there and going to conventions and things like that. That also led to me meeting video game developers, and then that led to job interviews, and now I also write for video games. I hope I answered the question. I took a little bit of time.
No, you did exactly, because the thing is, that's what I wanted you to share, because it's amazing the other things that open up. I mean, one thing I don't really talk about too much is the fact that I do quite a bit of ghost blogging for clients' websites outside
Nice.
of just everything else we do with publishing. And I really wanted you to share that because there's so many different avenues that you can take. It doesn't just have to be necessarily on publishing. There's other opportunities. Ghostwriting, which is one of the things that my company does, but that's one of the things that has really opened up is the opportunity to help other people with sharing their stories. And the same thing with ghost blogging, to help them get that information on their websites, or even doing website audits to make sure that everything looks good, looks professional. It's just funny how these things open up. And you just shared a great example with working with the video game companies, writing scripts, working with the great late Stan Lee. I mean, it's just amazing what can open up just by writing a book and sharing your
Yes.
vision with other publishers.
Yes, and I love that you mentioned that you collaborate often with people to help them find their voice or polish, their work so that it's really ready for viewing. Because remember, nothing, no art is touched by only two hands or only one pair of eyes. Like collaboration, there is such magic in that. And I think as new writers, we put pressure on ourselves to do everything ourselves and keep everything close to our chest and everything is secret. But we have to remember that it's such a benefit to reach out to professionals and invest in your career. I remember specifically, I did back when I was a UT student in Austin, I was getting my major in English. I remember having to commit and going, you know what? I don't have the money to hire an editor, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to get another job and I'm going to get the funds to invest in my career and polish and hone my craft. So I often believe that we forget that sometimes you have to sacrifice beyond even what you're currently doing and take the extra step. That even after I graduated, I went back and I took more courses, just in community colleges. I hired editors. I invested in my craft and it really paid off.
Yeah, I think the best investment you can make is in yourself.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Okay, I like this. This is really cool. Kind of on the same vein that we just talked about with collaboration, I feel that advanced reader copies are really integral in getting in creating the foundation of your marketing strategy because there's nothing quite like being able to share with a brand new stranger that, hey, I wrote this book, called Holy Dominion, about this woman in tech and video game world, and I actually have an endorsement from a Blizzard Entertainment executive. So anyone in the video game world, if you mention the word Blizzard, like World of
Warcraft,
Warcraft,
yep.
Diablo, yeah,
Warcraft,
and
yep.
StarCraft comes to mind. So what that tells the stranger is that you've invested in your work enough to grant someone who's been in that space or been in that genre for a long period of time and they've looked at your work and they have quote unquote approved it and they like what you're doing in the genre or like the vision of the story, and that immediately gives your book or your story credence. And so I think with marketing, I think a really good place to start is realizing that if you invest in the work and you polish it to the point of, and I mean even beyond your own skill, you really invest in reaching out and collaborating with, even like what you do, Paul, like you said, you have these outlets that help you publish and polish and hone, and get your craft to the point where it's ready for the public. And I think too many people skip that step. So advanced reader copy is really investing in searching for the experts and the people that have been in your genre, whether whatever it is, to look at your work and say, hey, this is what I like about it, will help with your marketing strategy, will help you with the foundation so much.
Well, and one thing I want to talk to you as well with is the fact that you've had the opportunity to work with Stan Lee. So, are you able to share with us anything more about Project Nitron, or is it all kind of hush hush?
Well, it's pretty hush hush, but what I can share, what I really love about it is that it's so different than anything that Stanley has done. It's nothing like, Spider-Man. It's nothing that we've seen before. And what's really cool about it is, how the typical transmedia pattern is this, where you have the Hunger Game novels and then you have the Hunger Games movies, and it's the same story, right? It's, you read the novel and then you see it on the screen. It's very cool, but you can always compare it. You're like, oh, they changed this from the book or they changed this for the movie, and there's always that point of contention. What I love about Project Nitron is that Stan Lee had envisioned this incredible long timeline where the novels set the stage for this time period, for this world, for these characters. And then the comics will pick up from there and be, 10 years later. And again, I'm just snowballing, numbers, and they're not concrete. And then the movie is going to be at this point in the timeline 10 years later. And then the TV show will be at this point in the timeline 10 years later. So my point is, I have never seen this done before. You might see, let's just call her Jill. You might see Jill in my novel, who's 25 years old, and then you'll see Jill at 45 years old in the TV show. So it's like you get to see this character that you've fallen in love with and you've read in the novel, and then you've seen where she has ended up in this part of her journey 20 years later in the TV show. So it's the same world. It's this huge intellectual property, but it's along this long timeline, and I'm so thrilled to be writing the novels that sets the stage for the comics, the movie, the graphic novel, and the TV show. So, Project Nitron, bookmark it. It's so freaking exciting.
Well, and it's almost like Agent Carter, kind of like how they did with hers, where she was in the Captain America movie, then she had the TV show, then she showed up in certain parts in like Ant-Man, and then in some of the, like Captain America, I think it was Civil War, she was part of that, and then in the last part, which no spoilers, but the last part in Endgame as well.
Oh yes, thank you. Perfect example. Yeah, yeah. So it's a little futuristic because it's in the little bit of the future, but it's real world. You're gonna see, you know, things in Earth that a little bit fast forwarded, but in a whole new epic way. And again, I'm honored to be a part of it and being the author for this IP, but also I'm so intrigued to see audiences' comments on just how much risk and adventure and change and nuance Stan has envisioned for this new property.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Oh wow, this is such a great question. The book that just keeps coming back that really made an impact on me, that always populates in my mind, is by author China Miéville, and the book title is The City and the City. And I believe why that book just keeps coming back as my favorite is because it made such an impact on me personally, because I was raised in a very certain, like, conservative mindset, and this book taught me that you don't always have to abide by or believe in or continue rules and traditions and things we've been persuaded or raised to believe if they don't necessarily make sense, or even if they're not necessarily right or for the good of the world. Like, I in my adult years I've realized my instinct is to be very open-minded and to, like, just to embrace and love. I love cultures and traditions and languages. And so I love that this book, it's all about how these two cities live side by side, but they were brainwashed to ignore each other and treat each other like they don't even exist. And if you live on this side of the city limits, you're not even allowed to look or acknowledge or talk to the other city. And I love that throughout the book it taught me that just because something has always been done a certain way, or families have always believed or continued these cultural traditions, evolution or change, may be in order, like, for the good of all. And I love that. I love turning predictability on its head and making us stop and think and go, okay, why do I always have cereal for breakfast? Like, is that just something that I was just taught to do and I just do automatically because that's what I've done for 20 years? Or is there, like, can I change that and now, make a protein shake? Like, I love that book and how it has in a very cool thriller aspect, and the way China writes is quick, and he doesn't wait for the reader to catch up. Like, you have to be on point throughout the whole book, and I love that. I love expecting you to keep up on the details, and the way he weaves, words, it's beautiful. And plus, making you stop and think about your own traditions, cultures, and beliefs was just fantastic.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Oh, okay. I think the most influential TED Talk I've ever watched that really impacted me was by Simon Sinek. And so I think my favorite quote is from him. And he says, people don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And I love that because I realize that with writing, people aren't just going to be interested in your work because it's a book. They're really interested in the why did you write it, and what was your goal, your motivation, what drove you to write 400 plus pages and get through that journey. And I realized that we often want to turn away from our inner demons. We want to turn away from our trauma, from our pain, from moments that we've gotten bullied or assaulted or what have you. And I struggle with that myself, where it's so hard not to just turn painful memories to the back of your mind. But I realized that I was in a place of limbo where you can't heal from pain and from trauma if you turn from it. And if I realized that through writing, I could actually face episodes that I've been through and inject realness into the page and inject what we as all humans share when we are betrayed or when we're hurt from those closest to us or from strangers that you expect to be safe around. So realizing that has really taken my writing to a whole different level, where agents or video game developers or what have you say, look, there on that page, I can feel that is real. You pulled that from something real, and that is powerful. So I think that's why I like that quote from Simon so much. It's always really stuck with me. I do have a quote too that I made up, if you want me to share that one as well.
Sure.
I made up a quote that I like to share. I tell people to remember, lark your life. And the reason why I say that is because the word lark, I've always loved that word. I love the spontaneous adventure that you can think of from it. And I think that, oh, I apologize. And I think that we can get into our comfort zone and we forget to try something new. And let's just use skydiving as an example. Like, we're terrified of heights, but we push ourselves to skydive. Like, I really feel like pushing ourselves to discover new adventure can open up new opportunity, and we can meet new people. And so I try to remember to do that in my own life as well.
Well, Genese, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast. You can find me at genesedavis.com. That's Genese. Oh, my name always, it's hard to spell, it's hard to say, but hey, it's mine. And I'm also on Twitter at Genese Davis. I'm also on Instagram, and of course my author page is Genese Davis Official. But honestly, yeah, my website is probably the best. I'm always on my email, and if you ask questions through my website, it goes right to my email. And I definitely love meeting new collaborators, new people, new fans. So keep in touch. I'm happy to help.
Well, Genese, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.